Let's have a few notes to start off. Well, welcome to Lawrence, which is, among other things, the home of the Northeast Kansas Library System, where I was the director for 18 years. I've been asked to tell the story about the birth and growth of what we at that time called an Express, and is now been rebranded as NEKLS, our Koha system. But honestly, we did not start out to have an open source system. That was not our goal. What we did have as a vision or goal was improved service through cooperation. And I'll get a little bit more into that in just a moment. We knew that we were sort of on the right track when a teenager from one of our participating libraries sent us a message that being part of this system was like having a big, well-funded, big city library without leaving the country, because that's kind of what we wanted, was everyone to have that access. When I came to NEKLS in 1996, many of our libraries did not even have a personal computer. Very few of them had broadband access. And if they had any kind of local automation system, it was a standalone system that did not provide access to anything but that local collection. Well, we started working through those kind of basic automation issues. And as we did that, we came up with a vision, and that was that users have direct, can search, they can have direct and convenient access to library resources. And that included that they could access the collection from any internet device. They could directly request any item in that shared collection, that they could have those items rapidly delivered to their library through a interlibrary delivery system. I also mentioned that at the time that we started this out, of course, there was a statewide interlibrary loan system, but to me, that was not direct and convenient access. That was indirect and eventual access. But the patron did not have the ability to actually be the user. Tell you just a little bit about NEKLS. We're a 14 county region. We include the largest public libraries in Kansas, and we include a library in a town of 150. From the time that, at least that I was associated with NEKLS, we were believers in cooperative services. That is, we undertook with funding from the state library to provide a number of statewide services that were sort of beyond our own boundaries. And we also, I think, thanks in large part to Liz and to Brenda, our tech people, an involvement in open source software, including a service providing websites for libraries throughout the state. We're operating at one time about 200 websites for public libraries. All right, so what did we do? I'm going to talk a little bit about what went right and what went wrong. And this kind of comes in several different stages, because it seems like every time we took a step forward, we also took a little bit of a step back. And I want to thank the member libraries of NEKLS for their patience as we work through each of these stages of difficulty. The first thing we did was to bring in a consultant, because first of all, our board had to be convinced that it was a good idea to invest a large amount of money in a shared system. So we brought in a consultant He said, yeah, you ought to invest a lot of money in a shared system. But what we did at that time, partly because there were certain members of our board who were really interested in us utilizing the resources of one of the major libraries in the Kansas City area, we joined an existing consortium in one of those libraries that was utilizing the Cersei automation system and had a number of academic libraries in their consortium in addition to the host public library. So we joined that library, and I have a lot of good friends there, but it didn't quite work out how we wanted. They hadn't brought in new members in a long time. They had brought in a lot of college libraries and special libraries sometime in the past. And they weren't really, they weren't used to working with the small public libraries, and they weren't used to bringing in a bunch of new libraries. And what we did was we had what I call the 9 pioneers. These are this select group of libraries that said, yeah, they'll try this out, because it wasn't as if our libraries just all swamped into our system and said, yeah, this sounds wonderful, sign me up. But we found nine brave souls who said, yes, they would participate. And we brought them on. And these are some of the issues were that the consortium we joined was not really used to training the sort of personnel that we had in our libraries. They also were not used to bringing on 9 new libraries at a time. They hadn't probably brought a library on for quite a few years at the time that we joined. In addition to the automation side of this, I've always felt a courier delivery service was essential for a resource sharing system. It's not just an option. So at the same time that we started down that Cersei system, we developed our own homegrown courier service to deliver items to our libraries with a connection to the host library. So what did we learn? We learned, first of all, we didn't want to be part of a system hosted by a large metropolitan library. We wanted to be independent and manage with assistance the service. And we definitely didn't want to be part of Cersei. I went to a Cersei conference one time when I was with that outfit, and learned that it takes about 3 years to suggest some sort of change and to actually have it go through the various hoops and become a part of the software. And at that time, when we were talking about, well, what are we going to do? We started down this path. We have more libraries that want to join now. Liz and Brenda, our friendly tech folks, said, well, what you really ought to do is open source. And since I usually do what they tell me to do, mostly, that's what we did. And we looked at Equinox, and we looked at Koha. At that point in time, Equinox was at a fairly early stage. It had basically it had an interlibrary loan system and a catalog, but it didn't have some of the other functionality. And so, and quite honestly, they didn't make a major push to be the provider for us. So we ended up choosing Koha, and see, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I'm doing talking and not advancing here, which is one of my failings. In 2008, we signed a contract with a Koha vendor, and we moved the 9 libraries in, And then we started adding libraries, and we had about 20 libraries with that vendor. But then there was that other part of the equation, which was the delivery. There had once been a delivery service in Kansas, but it was not a very universal one. And the homegrown one we were operating, it was time to move past that, because there were regional automation systems developing in all parts of Kansas. There was no real statewide system. And so what happened was, well, actually I chaired a delivery planning study, and we ultimately decided with a shared funding by the regional systems, the participating libraries, and the State Library of Kansas to implement a new statewide delivery system that would be delivered through a commercial delivery vendor. And NEKLS agreed to be the coordinator of that service, because we saw it as so tightly interwoven with our efforts at a regional automation system. And a vendor was selected, Henry Industries, who has proven to be an excellent delivery vendor. And we made that transition. Okay, so then we added additional libraries. We worked with our initial vendor for 3 years, although there was a change in management at a certain point. Candidly, we didn't feel we were there yet as far as the type of support that we wanted. And it was slow to bring new libraries in, and we weren't getting the kind of technical support we felt we needed. And so after 3 years, we essentially bought out of that contract and moved to ByWater. And part of that decision, which was very important to us, was that we wanted to ensure that we were part of the standard community version of Koha, and we felt that ByWater was committed to that as well. And that's one of the reasons we made that choice, as well as the fact that they gave us a pretty good price. And we have enjoyed working with ByWater, at least up to the time that I left in 2014, and I hope still today. Now, that does not mean, you can see what I'm talking about one step forward, one step back. That does not mean that all was well. We did add significant numbers of new libraries, and I'll sum up at the end kind of where we've eventually gotten to. But we encountered significant response time problems, to the point that it was just really wasn't acceptable. And ByWater worked with us closely and persistently, and our member libraries were patient. And I want to give a shout out to the NEKLS staff that worked hard on trying to resolve these issues. And eventually that situation did improve. And it's beyond me to specify for you exactly what changes were made, but we did improve that technical problem. Now, as we had kind of really settled in with ByWater, and we had brought in more libraries, each of those libraries having a slightly different situation. Some of them had robust acquisitions budgets, some of them didn't. Some of them were more interested in sharing their materials than others. although it was sort of a part of the deal with our system that you had to share. But what that meant exactly was not uniformly understood in the same way by all of our members. And so we did have a number of debates about exactly what restrictions should be placed or could be placed. And I'm not in a position, particularly having been away from NEKLS for 8 years now, to say how that's all worked out. But I do know that in general, our member libraries did believe in the concept of sharing, and it was a matter of defining exactly what they meant and whether there were exceptions for a particular library to some extent or another. But I am very proud of the member libraries of NEKLS who have been so willing to share the resources that they have purchased with one another. Okay, now where are we at today? I'm just going to kind of wind up with just a general summary of where we have finally gotten to, and someone from NEKLS may wish to elaborate. Currently, we have 46 member library locations. We have one library system that has several branches, but most of our libraries that are in our Koha system are single branch, more or less rural or ex-urban type libraries. We have one school district library that has 5 locations. We have a community college library, and we have also started providing access to digital resources. And in fact, we have one library that uses a system for sharing digital resources, but really is not part of the standard catalog in terms of sharing their local book and NAV collection. As I told you, we started out with these nine brave libraries, many of which were quite small. As of last year, we had a shared collection of about 1 million items, a circulation of about 500,000. And of those 500,000, about 30% were items that were shared between libraries through interlibrary holds. So that's kind of the story of where we started, which was nowhere, and where we have gotten to today. And it's been an interesting journey, but I think well worth it. And I think we have met our vision of direct and convenient access to library resources in Northeast Kansas. Liz, are there any questions at this point, or should I just turn it over to Liz? Okay.
Thank you. That's a really amazing story. I mean, I was there for it, but like, it's still amazing when you hear it. So I'm going to flip over to my presentation. Yeah. This one. Why are you so annoying? Oh, yeah. Oh, it's like just being dumb. See, now I need the technical support. Oh, thank you. Here we go. All righty. No, but seriously, why should we use free and open source software in libraries? I mean, the too long, and I didn't read and didn't care to listen, is it's the values, right? Like, we all believe in this thing and we think that it's good and we should continue to do it. So you probably want to know who I am. My name is Liz Ray. I'm originally from Kansas. My dad worked in a nonprofit consortium of colleges in central Kansas, and my mom worked for the Arts Council, also a nonprofit. I've only worked in what felt like corporate environments for a total of about 1.5 years of my entire career. And the rest of it I've spent in education and library settings, either adjacent or directly. You can see that I come by all of this fairly honestly. So when we're talking about free and open source values, what are we talking about? Sharing. How many of you have code in Koha? There's only actually, you didn't raise your hands. I know there's more of you. Okay, so why do you do that? You do it because probably it's part of your job, but also you want to do things that are good for yourself and your libraries and the people that you serve. Openness, because when something is hidden away in a box, there's no way that anybody knows what's happening there. We want to make sure that the software that we're using is transparent and that we know what's in it and what we can get out of it and what it can do. Collaboration. How many of you here are friends and have met people today that you have only ever talked to online? Right? Like, how closely do we collaborate day to day? And it's all because we share this value that is the open source value of collaboration. I think we all want to do good things for humanity. There are 900 people signed up for this conference from around the world. And some of those places are places that may have never, ever had a library system before. And that's your work. That's their work. And we did that together. Oh, I pushed a button. Okay, here we go. So also cooperation and co-opetition. Now, how many of you have heard the word co-opetition before? Good, good. Okay, so lots of you. Koha isn't possible without cooperation. Koha is a Maori word for a reciprocal gift. That means that when you give something, you can expect to get something back. And the relationships between the vendors who use Koha is the same. You know, all of the different vendors around the world and individual developers and people who are contracted to work on Koha, all of them are both using and contributing to Koha and its ecosystem. Now, we all make money and we try not to step too hard on each other's toes. It's mostly successful, and that is co-opetition. We're cooperating, but also a little bit competing. We all know that many hands make light work. The Koha bug tracker has over 30,000 bugs in it now, which is a lot of bugs. But I'm going to imagine, and I haven't taken statistics, so if anyone actually knows right now what the actual number of open ones are, it is nowhere near that number. And that is the testament to the companies and the people who work on Koha. We are working together to make this thing better and actually make it pretty amazing. And we want to be good stewards of the resources we're given. I mean, in the case of NEKLS, you know, it wasn't all about the money, but it's kind of about the Benjamins, right? So I don't know, Jim probably doesn't really remember this because this kind of happened while NEXpress was coming in with Cersei. But we had a library in a very little town, probably about, I don't know, how big is McLeod? Small. Less than 1,000. Okay, library, less than 1,000. They did not have an automation system. It was a fairly new library at the time. They wanted to spend their money on doing programs and buying materials and doing all those wonderful things that libraries do for their communities. And they did not want to spend money on a library system, but let's be honest, they needed one. So I know what you're thinking. You're like, oh, she put Koha in that library. Wrong. Nope. At the time, there was another open source library system. It had MARC support and it was web-based. and this should all sound very familiar, but it was Open Biblio. And I put Open Biblio in this library, and they used it for several years. In fact, until they came into NEKLS, we migrated them out of it. But the thing was that we took an old computer and we put Linux on it, and we put Open Biblio on it, and they used that system in their library for several years, and they didn't pay anything, really. I mean, they had, a computer and expertise from the NEKLS system, which the county paid some taxes for. And that system worked for several years. And the reason that I'm telling you this story is it was at that moment that I thought, how can we do this, but bigger and better? And at the time, I didn't actually think that there would be a product as cool as Koha. That where the people were cool and you like to work with them and they're fun to talk to and they get stuff done. I didn't know about that. So I have to find my notes. So we were working on this Cersei project. And as we've learned, there were very big things happening at NEKLS. This Cersei Dynex consortium, Jim kind of glossed over some of this. I'm gonna be like super pointed, so don't be mad if the Cersei people are watching. I deep respect for you. It was super spendy to use Cersei, right? It had per seat licensing. The rules of the consortium we joined were very rigid. The NEKLS libraries are often, as Jim alluded to, they're very full of mad schemes and they don't fit well into the proprietary boxes that you want to put them in. Like you want to put them in a box, it's like it's a square hole, round peg, it isn't going to work. The values of NEKLS itself were kind of chafing against this. NEKLS wanted free and open resource sharing between libraries. And this consortium wasn't really willing to support that in the way that we wanted them to. So we thought that's not great. And the first 7 libraries, 6, how many? There were 8. I thought there were 7, but the first 8 libraries didn't particularly like this system. It was not great. It was difficult to learn. The training wasn't amazing. Again, their round pegs didn't fit in the square holes. Didn't feel nice. It didn't feel nice. So, I mean, Koha, right? That's obvious, right? It's totally obvious. Actually, it wasn't obvious. Koha at the time, like specifically around the time when we were coming into Cersei, it was untested at any sort of scale. And there was a period there where there was big jumps in Koha. So I'm talking about like 2.2. It was untested at any sort of scale, and our scale wasn't huge, but for Koha, it was going to be pretty big. The support for open source at that exact moment was going to be from within NEKLS, i.e. me, and I'm pretty clever, but I know a lot more now. And at the time, I was super a noob. Like this could have gone so badly. All right. It was a lot harder to run Koha at that time. You guys, it's so much easier now. And the libraries had to be brought on board with any change. So they're sitting out there using Cersei and they're feeling annoyed by it. But the idea of going back through and migrating all of this stuff again and changing the system that they've maybe only just changed a few years ago, it's not super appealing. Like, not to say that they wouldn't do it, but it's like, maybe not. Don't want to do that. There were only a very few libraries in the US using Koha, and almost all of them were libraries with local system administration or and maybe also possibly a Perl developer sitting around who wanted to play with something. I mean, that's the way that most people get into Koha. It's like somebody's like, hey, I got this Perl app. What do you think? And they're like, I don't know Perl, but this looks fun. And those people are nice. And I mean, of course, Evergreen and Koha were really the only options at the time. And so we were looking at kind of at both of those, and Evergreen had more of a Cersei type of setup. And we were looking for more of a web type of thing. It didn't really stop us from continuing to look at Koha and open source software. As Jim mentioned, we were already working on a project called the Kansas Libraries on the Web, which used WordPress, which at the time was not as slick as it is now. And we were running websites for the Kansas, and we had been running a SquidGuard proxy for internet filtering for across the state. So we already had some experience with running large scaled systems, but not this particular one for a really crazy mission critical app. So we wanted to provide the best service we can for the resources we have available, right? It was about this time that the library citrus fruit company started supporting Koha. And if you know, you know. They came to NEKLS and they gave us a really quite impressive song and dance. Koha had just gotten MARC support, and it was paid for by one of their partners, and it had only taken 6 months to get this massive feature into Koha. Wowie. Like 2 years for a feature in Cersei, right? Like that's unheard of in library software. It was using a fast full text indexer now. It wasn't just depending on SQL. Wow, you could do relevancy and faceting. Whoa. Version 3 was so fly. Like it was so fly. And they were like, we're gonna make this amazing, right? And the magic sentence that their salesman uttered was, if your ILS is a bus, libraries can not only drive the bus, but they can help you spec the bus and design the bus and build the bus. And all of that is alluding to the fact that the Koha community, which is you all, are here to make this thing that we use better all the time. I mean, you can kind of imagine that this spoke to our librarians. They're like, heck yeah, I want to be in something that's flexible, and that when I have a problem, potentially I can make a suggestion and that code will come into Koha. You know, that was an interesting thing to our librarians. And it wasn't as expensive as Cersei Dynamics. If we're being totally honest, and it's good to be honest. So this feels like it's forward thinking, right? We're thinking about the future of not only ourselves, we're thinking about the future of all of the libraries beyond ourselves, the libraries in Africa, the libraries in Australia, the libraries in Europe. Hello, everyone. We're thinking of them, and we're also thinking about the fact that they are probably thinking of us. So let's do something that suits us and makes things better for libraries everywhere. I mean, this is writ large the NEKLS vision, right? As it was given to us at the time. You know, convenient access to shared resources. It feels right. And not many libraries are doing this yet. So we decided to migrate from Cersei to Koha 3.0. So it went well, right? I mean, yes, they're still with Koha. The beginning of the ride was bumpy. Now, and partially that was a function of the time in which we were coming into this fantastic project that we call Koha. The community was smaller. The documentation and resources and bug tracker, most of that didn't exist in the sort of mature form that it exists now. We waded through bugs and customizations and doing it wrong and making use of features that made upgrades really hard and doing things a weird way and modifying our code and not staying on the strictly community. We had a tiny fork for a while with features that we had commissioned that, we desperately needed but hadn't been merged back in. These are bumps in our road. Anyone who's ever had a development go through Koha knows that there are many steps, and at that time, the steps were not well defined. So, as many of you will know, the process in Koha now is someone writes a patch, someone signs off the patch, they do a little testing, somebody QAs the patch to make sure it's not going to break circulation. And then the release manager pushes that patch into Koha, and then eventually it's released. And the releases come every 6 months for major releases and every month for bug fix releases. And so this is a flow and pattern that we're all very used to now. Really good. That didn't exist when we were here. And part of the reason that Koha is the way it is now, and the way that the community is the way it is now, is because some really clever people decided that we needed to impose some order on this chaos and have a little more accountability across the wider community. So one company, for example, shouldn't necessarily be signing off on their own patches. That's one of the core tenets of the community QA process, just to keep everyone more or less honest. We had many, many meetings where we questioned whether we were doing the right thing. Things kind of looked sort of upsetting and bad. There were times when we had really angry phone calls with our former vendor. It's just being like, what's going on? We don't understand this open source process. We don't, you're making us promises and we don't understand what's happening. Can you help us? And they never really answered those questions to our satisfaction. And that's why we eventually left them. But in the spirit of generosity and openness and collaboration, we worked through the problems with the help of our various Koha vendors. We offered up the system's time and resources to the community, and we embraced openness, sharing, and interoperability. We wanted this to work. I mean, we did. We were stubborn. We wanted it to work. And because we believed in those boss values, not just for open source nature, but for libraries. And here I am presenting to you from Lawrence, Kansas, which is where NEKLS is still a Koha user, which is awesome. And in the end, obviously they're still with Koha, and I'm still working on Koha. I've worked on Koha since 2008. Yeah, in the end, I'm still with Koha, and I'm still working on it. So what's next? So what's next really depends on you all, and not just you here in this room, although you're excellent and wonderful for being here, and in-person collaboration is awesome. But all of you around the world who are listening to this talk or watching it later, don't be afraid of us. The community wants you here. We want you here. There's current developments in Koha and developments in the library environment are bringing new people into Koha all the time. There are going to be budgetary concerns coming. Potentially, some of those bigger systems are going to be too burdensome for you. If you need to go it on your own, there are very good resources for you now. So you don't ever have to feel like you're on your own. So a thing you might be asking yourself is, well, how can we brainstorm some ideas about how to bring more folks into the Koha community? Because we always need to have fresh ideas and new people coming in. And a fairly significant potential issue is that, Perl developers are kind of hard to come by. So how can we make sure that our community remains robust? And I have a few ideas, and I would like it very much if you all would think about this, about ways in which you can help make our community continue to be strong. The few things that I think about is if you run a company, you can have internships. So you bring in a very voraciously smart young person and you show them this thing that they can play with, and you show them how they can make this better. And I swear to you, they'll be hooked. I've seen it over and over. Open source boot camps, where the topic of the boot camp is, we're going to fix bugs in this Koha. Like, here's a really simple thing. And here's how you use Git. And here's how you look at a bug tracker. And here's how you report a bug. And here's how you would go about submitting a patch. And the Koha community actually has really good documentation on almost all of that. And then, of course, there's the casually talking about, well, I work on this thing and it's pretty cool and the people are nice. And it really is a way to feel better about the state of the world. When everyone is sharing and you're working on a project with people who are around the world from you, it's difficult to see them as other. So I feel like it's a good way to keep yourself in the context of our global environment. That's all I have for you. And thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and I'm sure Jim would be as well. Now I think we're on break. There are pastries. Am I handing this to you?
All right, thank you, Liz. And thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. My name is Christopher Brandon. I'm the Vice President of Koha-US. And thank you again to everyone that made it here today. It's so nice to see so many faces. And we're going to be going into our next presentation, which is actually pre-recorded. So before we actually get started here with that, we need to do a quick check to make sure our online people can actually hear the presentation. So bear with us for just a moment. If you need to grab some beverages or take a quick run to the restroom, go for it. But we'll be doing our next presentation in about 7 minutes here.